Good morning, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio Sinoland, for another fascinating expose. Before we get started, again, I'm bring a lot of new and refreshing information about China, what's going on in China, to all the of you who read, listen to, and watch my writing and journalism. Please make a donation to the Fundrazr button above and below, or the PayPal, jeff@brownlangwa.com, and I would really appreciate it. This is a lot of work to put these programs together. And thank you. This one is entitled "Harvard Illegally Collected DNA Samples in China Throughout the 90s. Lies upon lies and many cover-ups have kept this criminal conduct hidden in plain sight. Looks like bioengineered germ warfare to target ethnic Chinese." Pictured above, Harvard University, SARS and Covid-19, both viruses which there is a 99% chance of being man-made in one of the United States' many bioweapons laboratories around the world. Some of Eurangloland's most zealous centurions for global capitalism are its, quote, named, end of quote, top-ranked universities. They are like Western imperial peas in a pod. Here we go. I would like to thank my good friend George Burchett, who posted this article below via his email news service. Same to Dennis Etler, who posted it on Facebook. And hats off to the anonymous person who did yeoman's work cleaning up an apparent online translation of this article in Mandarin. It must have taken hours. And the article was in Chinese by a Chinese citizen named Xianglei. And the English translation is "Review of Harvard's Genetic Hunt in Anhui," which is a province in central China. Here's my introduction. Mr. Xianglei's expose is long and detailed, and I encourage you to read it. It makes for devastating evidence. However, if you have time constraints, I went through it to glean for critical highlights below. What is clear is that for almost 10 years in the 1990s, before SARS, Harvard ran amok in central China, collecting DNA samples from unwitting rural folk, and there were no controls in place to keep it from all being sent back to the United States. One Harvard study alone in 1993 screened 200,000 Chinese. It's easy to get DNA via skin scrapes or throat swabs from trusting volunteers, and a shipping box can hold tens of thousands of tissue samples at a time. If you read the whole expose, there have been lies upon lies and cover-ups on both the U.S. and Chinese sides. For the prior, it is to deny criminal conduct. For the latter, the authorities in Anhui province, where all the genetic theft took place, finally realized they had been duped by Harvard, and with such a huge loss of face, humiliation even, they are covering over their tracks. The creepiest passage is a quote from a local farmer who was getting his blood taken. He said, "The arm reached into the curtain through a small hole, and the doctor was behind the curtain, was invisible." Oh, gosh. End of quote. Since when have you had your blood taken or a physical checkup and the doctor hid behind a curtain so you couldn't see them? It's like a scene from a 1950s sci-fi horror flick, and you're the alien's guinea pig. That tells you all you need to know about Harvard's criminal behavior in service of genocidal empire. Here are my extracts, and the first paragraph sets the tone. Since they are excerpts, I will do about a 2-second pause between each one so you'll know. If I continue to keep going, it's that same extract. Here's the first extract, the first paragraph, which sets the tone. The immorality of the U.S. constitutional system should also be investigated. For example, the National Institutes of Health, known for its rigorous auditing. Why would one person be responsible for so many projects? At Harvard University, where Xi Jinping is the earliest millennium company that invested in the project, is there no responsibility? Some people blame the Chinese partners for not seriously implementing the relevant ethical rules. I propose that launching and funding these genetic projects are not these Chinese partners. This is a project funded and led by the United States. The question is not whether these Chinese staffs perform poorly. The question is why U.S. funding agencies allow these unqualified partners to participate in such research. When we drove from Hefei to Anqing and Yuexi, we just wanted to hear for ourselves whether the farmers who had given blood samples knew whether they were, quote, contributing, end of quote, to an international cooperation project. The farmer, his wife, and 2 daughters participated in 2, quote, medical examinations, end of quote, in November 1996 and March 1997. Each of them had 2 health cards issued that year. One recorded the examination on November 5, 1996. The item included cardiopulmonary function, blood pressure, etc., and blood was drawn. The other one was recorded on March 10, 1997. The second check also took blood, more than the first, but I don't know how much, he said. But he did say the arm reached into the curtain through a small hole, and the doctor was behind the curtain and was invisible. Their family all said very positively that no one had seen or read the informed consent form, nor did they know about the cooperation with Harvard. We asked the professor who funded the survey. He said the money was given by the Ministry of Health and the World Bank for a rural health talent training project. I told him that the World Bank's projects are documented. The professor immediately changed his mind and said that he did not remember where the money came from because, quote, it did not cost much, end of quote. How much is not much spent? He said, I don't remember. Back in Beijing, we asked the Beijing Representative Office of the World Bank. The answer is that the World Bank has never funded health projects in China that require blood tests. According to internationally accepted bioethical guidelines, participation in human biomedical research must be approved by the individual, and consent is based on knowledge. Informed content includes both the research purpose, method, and research project, such as who funds and benefits the research-related situation, as well as the interests and rights of the participants. But Harvard's genetic project in Anhui completely ignored these principles. On May 14, 2002, when Harvard University President Summers gave a speech at Beijing University to answer students' questions, he publicly acknowledged that the human body research conducted by Harvard University in rural China in Anhui was, quote, not only wrong, but also extremely wrong, end of quote. I noticed that the people who came to Anhui to investigate in the United States were their own professors at the Harvard School of Public Health who had organized violation programs, not third parties. And someone told me that it was Xi Jinping who led and accompanied them in the investigation. In other words, he was investigating himself. Since Beijing had not lifted the ban during the SARS period, I could not go out, so I sent an email to one of the Harvard investigators, the director of the Ethics Committee of the Harvard School of Public Health, and asked if he spoke Chinese. Can he communicate directly with Anhui farmers in Chinese? If not, who is his translator? Who arranged his visit to China? What sampling sites has he been to? How did he know that the informed consent was signed by the research subjects at the time of the research? How independent is his investigation? However, instead of answering these questions, he forwarded my email to a spokesperson for the Harvard School of Public Health. The spokesperson only sent me a statement that Harvard School of Public Health issued on May 30th after the U.S. government investigation was over and did not answer any questions I asked. The farmer we looked for was a clue from insiders. He was 55 years old in 2003. He told us that one morning in the fall of 1995, the, quote, come-up called him to the town health center for a, quote, medical examination, end of quote. They let go of their work and went because it was said that the, quote, medical examination was for farmers and, quote, you don't need money to treat if you are sick, end of quote. This is a good thing for the peasant who usually looks at no money to buy medicine. So he's always looking for, free medication and has to wait until he can't bear to take a slice when he can't bear it. In other words, he only spends money on medicine when he has to. Remember, this is a machine translation that someone cleaned up. It's awfully good, in spite of some, boo-boos like that. They have 4 sons and took 2 sons to a medical examination as required. Because they had no money to take a car, they walked more than 10 miles and rushed to the town health center. After getting a free lunch, they started to check in the afternoon. They recalled that at the time there were 20 or 30 people from other villages. Among the 30-odd households in their village group, they were the only ones who were called to participate in the medical examination. In other words, the other households, the other 20 or 30 were from other villages, and he didn't know them. During the, quote, checkup, they took their temperature and took blood. The inspector then asked the farmer to open his mouth and sprayed a, quote, fog-like, end of quote, thing in his mouth, making him say, ah. He didn't know what it was, and no one told him what the inhalation of this medicine would do and what risks it might pose. He remembered that the thing, quote, was packed in a plastic bottle like a mosquito repellent, end of quote. Ah! After 3 or 4 shots, he was out of breath as if he were dead. Afraid, he rushed to rescue, which means the emergency room, hang water, which means he got an infusion, and fill oxygen, which means he got oxygen. None of the doctors who performed the examinations were local and spoke in different accents, but neither of them could tell where they came from. The peasant received his anger. In other words, that means, he suffered through what he was having to endure with the secret medicine given to him, or secret whatever, God knows what, until the middle of the night. After that, no one cares about him anymore. The next day, the couple left without question and left the hospital. They found a free ride home because there is no more money, and the 200 yuan given to them was spent on rescue, in other words, the emergency room. During the rescue, a doctor promised to send them medicine later, but, quote, they did not see the medicine to this day. Since then, they have never seen the doctors who performed the examinations, and no one has told them the results of the, quote, medical examination. Both husbands and wives are illiterate. They said that they had never seen or heard the, quote, informed consent before and after the supposed medical examination, nor had they signed or pressed a fingerprint on such a document. That's very common in China. If you can't read or write, especially older people, you use a fingerprint with red ink as your signature. They don't even know who their blood samples were given to. The village doctor was random when we arrived at Zongyang. He was 52 years old and had been a village doctor for more than 30 years. He made it clear that he knew that the above, quote, checkup was done for a, quote, for a genetic study at Harvard University, end of quote, but he couldn't say the name of the project. At the time, we were asked to inform farmers to, quote, check the body to see what caused asthma. So they were, obviously Harvard was looking for genes for the lungs. He was certain that he said for treatment, but then did not. He said that he was not without doubt about the project. He said, "When I heard that this was an American project, I thought about it and I was afraid there was something famous here." However, he, quote, rejected this question because it was led by a government organization, so he didn't speak out the doubt in his heart. In other words, he obviously smelled a rat. He could see what was going on and knew that it was bogus. And according to requirements, he registered the list and simple information of people with asthma in the village and their family members, about a dozen, he said. Then he accompanied the villagers who participated in the, quote, medical examination to the county epidemic prevention station. After this, quote, transfer list, he left, so he did not know the process of this so-called medical examination. No one told him or any of the peasants inspected what procedures were in place, nor did they tell them the results of these so-called physical examinations. He and these farmers have not seen or heard the informed consent that they were supposed to have, let alone that blood samples will be sent to the United States. No one mentioned it afterwards, he said. It's nothing, but he hopes to understand them and let us all know what is going on. We cannot count on the U.S. government to uphold justice for Chinese farmers and seriously implement bioethics. I just want to show that we Chinese are not without doubt about the genetic projects that your American institutions have done in China. The kind of seemingly serious investigations you have done on the problems with these projects are actually cutscene investigations, and we Chinese are not unnoticed. If you want to cover up these problems, then we will spread them to the whole world, which is what I'm doing. The fourth issue of the American Journal of Bioethics in 2004 published a letter from an internationally renowned biological and medical ethicist to the editor of the journal, condemning Harvard's Human Genetic Research Project in Anhui as contrary to bioethical principles. The 7 well-known ethicists from Australia, Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, and Switzerland said in their letter that Harvard's research in rural Anhui involved environmental and occupational diseases, genetic environment interactions, genetic diseases, population genetics, reproduction health, asthma, and chronic respiratory disorders. These studies have not been approved by ethical review, informed consent has not been obtained, and Chinese genetic sample providers are unlikely to benefit. They express deep concern that such a well-known institution and research of this nature, with funding from the National Institutes of Health, could escape rigorous ethical review. A German ethicist told me that this is the first time that the international ethics community has expressed public concern about such a matter and condemned the relevant institutions. After SARS, Tong Zhang, a colleague of Xiong Lei, published a book in October 23 entitled The Last Line of Defense, Thoughts on the Loss of Chinese Genes. End of book title. Based on the fact that some U.S. scientific research institutions have hunted Chinese genetic samples since the 1990s, and combined with the phenomenon that Chinese are particularly susceptible to SARS virus, and I added an editor's note, 96% of all global SARS deaths were ethnic Chinese, and I can also add that 99.5% of COVID deaths are all ethnic Chinese. He put forward a hypothesis. SARS may be a genetic weapon against the Chinese. As a result, he was verbally abused. In response, Tong Zhang said, quote, I just proposed a possibility. I have the right to doubt. End of quote. Although many experts say that these two viruses, SARS and COVID-19, are not directly related, although they have been traced to a bat, which the DARPA in the United States has been using bat viruses to develop bioweapons. As a layman, I can also see that these two viruses have one feature in common. They both target our lungs, targeting our respiratory system, making us suffocate. I personally think that the questions raised by Tong Zhang are indeed very important. The Chinese should remain vigilant. Scientific research certainly needs evidence. However, problems like genetic weapons can only be doubted if evidence is available. It is too late. China's first, quote, regulations on the management of human genetic resources, end of quote, which came into effect on July 1st, 2019, just 6 or 7 months ago, clearly stipulates that the collection, preservation, utilization, and external provision of human genetic resources in China must not endanger China's public health, national security, and public interests, in line with ethical principles, protect the legal, legitimate rights and interests of resource providers. The regulations specifically stipulate that foreign organizations, individuals, and institutions established or actually controlled by them shall not collect or deposit human genetic resources in China or provide genetic resources outside China. According to this regulation, those Harvard projects can no longer be carried out in China. But think about how many genetic samples Harvard took away from us, especially samples of asthma genes. Shouldn't we investigate? Where did they end up? What's it for? Relevant research institutions in the United States should not explain to farmers in should not explain to farmers in Anhui who provided blood samples to us. That's the end of my excerpts from Xiong Lei's fascinating article about the sordid and illegal and criminal conduct, not only of Harvard, but he also mentions Duke University, the named universities. They love this kind of stuff. Plus all kinds of biopharma companies from around the world, pumping millions of dollars into this. And clearly the Chinese were trusting the Westerners based on their reputation and their name, their names, and the Chinese got hoodwinked. And finally, in 2019, they finally passed a law to prevent this kind of criminal activity from happening in China again. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio Sinoland, signing out. Thank you.